up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman. No, it's Jeff Peters from Commuter Comics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And our
I don't
subject-
guarantee I'll be flying.
Well, you know, we're going to fly out of here. We're going to talk about comic books and all about rare comic books, action superheroes. It's going to be a great show. Jeff, how did you start collecting comics? How did it all start for you?
Well, my dad collected comics long before I ever came along, before I was even a twinkle in his eye. The apocryphal story goes that when he went into World War II, my grandparents he was a big fan of Little Abner, which was a strip by Al Capp, a political satire strip in the in the 40s and went all the way up through like 72. And when he was in the war, they clipped the daily strip out and saved them for him, so that when he got back he could read them all. And then he continued to collect them. And he also read Pogo, and he read Pogo Possum by Walt Kelly.
Remember that well?
And he read another political satire, and he read Mad, more political satire. So that was, he had that, and my older brother collected, and he was into all the superheroes and the stuff that was coming out in the 50s and 60s is what he had, which was mostly the Superman, Batman, Justice League, a lot of stuff from Dell that was based on television series like The Rifleman and that kind of thing.
Oh, yes.
Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, the Big Dell Giants, which were thick books for 25 cents, and you'd get like 100 pages of stories. Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear and all that kind of stuff. So when I started, they would all read them, and I actually learned to read by reading Peanuts in the Sunday paper. I would read the funnies. After my dad was finished, he would give us the funnies. We'd go into the living room, we'd lie down, and that's how I figured out how to read. So it kind of runs in the family. We all have read comics at some point in time.
So you learned, you had fun at the same time?
Absolutely.
It's
comics
terrific.
are a blast, yeah.
Now, my next question is, how did comic books happen? I mean, I've heard stories. It was the caveman who had things on the wall, hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
These were the first attempts that comics had, but
Well,
what was the real first time?
Comics comics are generally a mixture of word and pictures, is what they say. So that has been going on. I mean, hieroglyphics really were words and pictures together. Right. So as far back as the Egyptians. There are other things before that, or you know, the caveman wall is a place to begin, but really they started getting put together in I'm not sure about the exact dates, but in France and England they started doing the picture with the words underneath as plates, the Rake's Progress, that kind of thing. You see these the start of that in art. A fellow named Rudolf Toffler would actually do a drawing and then words underneath and tell a little story, and that is considered the beginning of the comic strip.
Was this a comic nature, or was it a serious
nature? Oh no,
nature?
they were comic nature.
Or a satire of the times?
Most of it comes out of a political satire, political cartooning. That's what it was. I mean, here in the U.S., it's pretty much considered Ben Franklin's Unite or Die, with the pictures of the snake chopped up with all the states written on it,
right,
is considered the first political cartoon, and that is literally words and pictures used together. So that was the beginning of it here, and then it grew into more editorial cartoons. They've constantly been done throughout history. Whenever there's a politician involved, there's always somebody drawing a caricature of them and then having them say something ridiculous or stupid. And most of the times it's a quote. But that grew into the comic strip form that we know now.
Right.
William Randolph Hearst was doing political cartoons in his newspapers. They developed a color printing process which led to the beginning of the comic strip character called the Yellow Kid.
Right, that was the first.
Right, was generally considered to be the first ongoing comic strip character, even
No, it was
though
like
they
about
were single panel.
1896 that it came out.
That's
We're
right.
talking a long time ago.
That's right. It's over, over 100 years ago. So, 110 if you want to get
Wow.
technical
Wow.
about it.
Sometimes
So,
I feel 110. So I really read
I
those.
hear you. But that, after Yellow Kid, it led into there was a giant explosion, because from Yellow Kid, other characters and little story strips, what we know as comic strips in the newspaper, now began to develop and began to be merchandised. And as people saw, oh, there's ancillary money to be made off of these, let's start creating more. And many, many artists went into it. Winsor McCay developed Little Nemo. That was the Little Nemo in Slumberland, where he would have a dream each time and wake up at the falling out of bed at the end. There are the Brownies and the Gumps and Life with Father and on and on. And during the 30s, there were a huge amount of them. And they were there in the 10s, the teens, the 20s, the 30s. The 30s, they began to branch out into adventure strips. You have to pardon
you're
me.
beeping, huh?
My phone.
Get excited
I'm a
over
very
those comic
popular
books, don't you?
fellow.
I'll tell you. I want to buy them now.
And in the adventure strips, you got things like Mickey Mouse and Flash Gordon and
Oh, yes.
I want to say the Lone Ranger, but I don't think that's right. Popeye. These characters, Tarzan, that had developed into comic strips. And comic books came about because the fellows that had that were printing the comics, the Sunday funnies, basically found that they had paper left over at the end of their print run on a Sunday. And they said, what can we do with it? And somebody said, well, and now the newspapers were about this big at that time. And so they said, well, if we fold this, we can get something that's about that size.
Clever.
And if we
Clever.
print a cover on it and stuff inside, then we can just reprint these Sunday things, because we already have the plates for them and everything. So we'll print those and see if anybody buys them. We'll charge a dime and see if anybody will buy them. And at the same time, there were things like the Big Little books, which had come out all during the 30s. And anybody that was on radio or film at the time had these Big Little books. And animation had taken off in the 20s and 30s. So you had Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck were around, and the Warner Brothers stuff. And they began to make these Big Little books, which were about this big. And on one side would be text, on the other side would be a picture. And the whole book is that way. Text and picture, text and picture, text and picture. And all done with popular characters. And kids were paying a dime for these books.
It was a lot of money back then.
Which was a lot of money. I mean, a loaf of bread was a nickel.
I know.
So a dime was a lot for entertainment. And a movie was, where you'd go in to see a movie, was a nickel or a dime. And you'd get a cliffhanger and a cartoon and a newsreel, and then your B feature, and then the feature picture.
Exactly.
So it was a huge amount of entertainment. You'd literally get 4 or 5 hours of entertainment in a movie theater with that dime. But from the comic strips, they tried it, packaging them in booklet form, and they had also been packaging them in books, and they'd been big sellers. And so when they tried it just as a paper form, and it sold, it was called Funnies on Parade, and they tried it, and it sold big time.
Wow.
And they had tried it also as gas station giveaways at Standard Oil.
Really?
Standard Oil did a whole bunch of them where they reprinted Mutt and Jeff, and they reprinted the Gumps and Life with Father and that kind of thing. And it took off. And they started printing these collections of the comic strips, which led somebody to the bright idea of, hey, what if we do original characters and sell original comics, which is when New Funnies came out, and they were new stories that were based on the comic strip characters. And then in about 1938, publishing companies said, national periodical publications said, you know what, let's we've got these guys, they've got this hero, let's put together a book, it'll be all new things, and see if we can sell that. And Action Comics was born. And
that was Superman.
That was Superman.
And that's the original Action Comic #1.
Well, this is not an original.
Well, not the original, but it's the original look.
This is what it looked like. The original Action Comics #1 in near mint condition there's an offer out there for $1 million.
$1 million for the original.
If you want to see a couple Action Comics #1, I recommend you go down to Baltimore. There's a museum called Jeppy's Entertainment Museum. And he has at least 2 copies of it sitting there, along with all the things that I'm talking about here too. Every major comic that came along.
How many in existence of Superman #1?
I personally don't know. They have tracked them. I think there may be a dozen, known to exist. It's an extremely rare book at this point, because what was going on in 1938, you had these comics. They were printed on pulp paper. But the war effort was to begin shortly, within two or 3 years, and there were paper drives. So they wanted kids to do paper drives, and even on the fronts of the comics, they would say, "Help us with the paper drive. Have a paper drive. Buy war bonds." The superheroes were all selling that stuff within 2 years, and so the kids would go, "I need paper. I need to be patriotic. Where do I find? Oh, I got this big stack of comics. I'll take those," and give them to the paper drive. And so the comics from certainly before the war years and after the war years are very difficult to find, because the kids would read them and then they'd donate them. But after Superman, there was a plethora. Superman was the first superhero, and Action Comics is considered the first superhero comic, as opposed to guys like Flash Gordon or Tarzan, who were simply men who were either in the future or in the jungle or that sort of thing, but they were just guys. He was an alien from another planet. He could fly. He could leap originally and then could fly, but he had X-ray vision and super strength. He was science fiction is what it was. And the pulps had all grown too, with science fiction and mystery and that kind of thing.
Now, were there other publishers who tried to copy Superman?
There were, in fact.
And what happened?
Marvel went, and then Wiz went, and Wiz developed Captain Marvel.
You can hold that up right, yeah.
Captain Marvel, who's also Shazam, and if you see the two of them,
yes, a big resemblance.
You'll see that they're pretty close. And out of Shazam, DC Comics, which is who published Action Comics and who they are today, ended up suing Wiz Comics Fawcett, and they stopped publishing the character.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was in the mid-40s, but there were many superheroes that came out in the 40s. You had Batman, you had Flash, there was Marvel Comics came, which was published originally by a company called Timely and became Marvel, and they had Human Torch, the Submariner, Captain America, because very quickly they were all fighting in the war.
Terrific illustrations. I mean, the illustrations are just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of movies were a result of comic books, like Superman became a serial.
Yep,
Batman became a serial.
Yep.
And I guess they all attribute that pretty much to the comic
Blackhawk
books.
became a serial. Yeah, very much so. Comics, since their inception, and comic strips have always been inspiration for film, television, radio shows.
Actually, we're going to have to take a break right now. I can't believe it's halfway through the show.
Are we?
But we're going to be
we're
back.
only after the 40s.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be back in a few minutes, and if you have a comic book while you're waiting, read the comic book, and don't touch that dial. We'll see you in just a little while.
Yo, what's up, baby? Wanna learn some history?
Check it out, check it out. Your GED right here, guaranteed, man. Come on, check it out.
Hey, how you doing? Educational videos, top quality, right here. I got live learning, beautiful books inside.
The National Center for Family Literacy.
Yo, I got your arithmetic right here.
Because you can't get your GED on the street. Call 1-877-FAMLIT1 for free learning programs like GED and family computer classes.
Who needs a high school diploma, huh?
The National Center for Family Literacy. The first step to a better life.
Begin! You're mine. Chicken.
McGruff here. If a bully is bothering you, play it smart and try to talk it out. Or get away and tell an adult.
Well done.
For more tips, write for my new free comic activity book. Play it smart and help take a bite out of crime.
And we are back. I can't believe we're halfway through the show. Was DC the first serious publisher of comics? I mean, what were the lines of different publishers? DC, Marvel,
Pretty much. DC
Dark
was
Horse.
DC, not known as DC, but now known as DC because they've all changed publishing.
Oh, they
names.
have.
But they were one of the very first serious publishers of comic books. What's now known as Marvel was right in there. There were a whole bunch of them, all during the 50s and the 60s. And at that point, during the 50s and 60s, comics spanned every possible genre, from mystery to romance to funny animals to superheroes to science fiction, horror, anything that anybody would read, any subsection you'd find in Barnes & Noble or Borders today. There were comics that dealt with that. But in the middle of the 50s, there were Senate hearings that were done because of a man named Wortham, who wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent. And the comic strips and the comic books were brought before Congress and asked to defend themselves.
Really?
And at that point in time, the Comics Code was imposed upon the publisher. Self-imposed this code, and that's when a lot of the stories, which have become more and more mature and more adult as the years went by, then began to disappear, because there was a real misconception that comics were just for kids, but really people of all ages were reading them, and that's why there was such a breadth of them. After the after the Senate hearings, comics went a different direction, and they became mostly the superhero comics that we know today, much tamer. And that was through most of the 60s and the 70s, where the comic code was put on comics.
Does that still exist today, the comic code?
The comic code exists, but
it still does?
A few years ago, Marvel decided to stop using the code, because what would happen is they would all take, every month they'd have to take their books, and they'd pay a fee to the code to check their books and then put the stamp on it. And Marvel decided, we don't want to pay this fee anymore, and we want to publish books that aren't bound by the code. So rather than doing another imprint or something like that, they just stopped putting it on. They said, we're going to implement our own ratings, all ages, for teens, for older teens, for mature readers, that kind of thing. But the code is still used.
Still used today?
It is still used, yeah. It doesn't have as much weight and as power as it did during the 60s and 70s.
Do they have like PG-13 comics or
there are comics,
rated?
There are XXX rated comics.
There are XXX.
I mean, it goes from there down to what we call, mature, which is much more graphic violence and language and sexuality, and then down to more of the teen general audience, which is 10 to 16, 17, 18. And then there's the all ages stuff, which is good for anybody. And there are many of them that are still all ages. Things like Donald Duck, Bone is one of my favorites, Uncle Scrooge, The Simpsons. Both Marvel and DC do Spider-Man, Batman, Justice League, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Teen Titans for a younger audience, as opposed to the regular books. There's the regular Batman, the regular Teen Titans, Superman, Spider-Man are a little more intense and not necessarily something you want to give to a 4-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old who's just learning how to read.
Wasn't there something I remember with Superman? It was Jenny Siegel, Joe Shuster were the people who wrote Superman. Am I correct?
They were the creators.
It was something to do with royalties. They were cheated out of royalties. What happened? That was kind of an interesting story.
Well, because it was all work for hire, they made a bunch of money off of it originally, but then they actually stopped. The company stopped hiring them to actually write their own character. So many years went by, and a fellow named Neil Adams, who worked with Denny O'Neil and recreated Green Lantern, recreated Batman in the 70s after the Batman TV show, which made all comics look pop and campy. Denny O'Neil and and Neil Adams started
Okay, we have Batman. We can hold on.
Detective. This was their is a replica of their first issue, and to turn him into more of a Dark Knight, a loner, the detective.
Right.
You know, bring him back to the roots from the 40s that made him such a popular character. But Neil Adams stood up for those artists and said, "Look, they created this character. They're destitute now because it was
It's terrible.
the late 70s, early 80s." And he said, "You know, these guys are not living well, and you've made millions, if not billions, of dollars off of licensing and publishing this character for all these years. Don't you think they should get paid something?" And there was a big battle. The artists came and they went to DC, and DC fought, and there was all kinds of things that happened. But the bottom line was, the end result rather, was that Siegel and Schuster in every Superman book now have, it always says Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and they get their rights, and their family gets their rights. So toward the twilight of their life, they were actually taken care of. Yeah.
Are much of the original creators still alive today, or have most of them passed?
From the stuff from the 40s, not a lot, but Stan Lee is still around, who did the whole resurgence of the Marvel characters, which started in the 60s. That's Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, the reinvention of Captain America, reinvention of Namor the Submariner, of the Human Torch, putting him as part of the Fantastic Four. Stan Lee's still alive and kicking. He just had a big thing on the Sci-Fi
great.
Channel. He's writing comics. There are a whole bunch of Stan Lee comics coming out now where he meets Spider-Man and meets Doctor Strange and is meeting all these people. So he still writes comics. He has his own company. And so a lot of the creators are still around, but some of them are starting to pass away.
Yeah.
Will Eisner, who is a real mover and shaker, he created a character called the Spirit. He did the Blackhawks for a while. He actually created the first graphic novel. He was the one that said, "Hey, instead of just taking the comics and putting them together in books like this, why don't we write a comic that's a full book?" And it's called Contract with God. And he was the one that did the very first book, graphic novel, a comic written specifically to be a novel. And
I mean, the graphics
he's the one that came up with the graphic
incredible.
novel.
I mean, are there? Tell us about some of the graphic artists who are responsible for some of these wonderful illustrations. I mean, they're just
terrific. Men like Jim Steranko, who brought pop art to comic books in the 60s and 70s. They're just amazing, incredible artists. I mean, right now they're tremendous guys working in the field. But there's the penciler, guys like Jim Lee and George Perez, who are the superstars. But so many other people work on the book. You have the inkers and the colorists and the editors that go in and, excuse me, for some reason I'm peeping.
You're a popular guy.
Somebody's telling me to
buy more comic books.
Yeah, somebody's calling in and saying, why isn't the store open? But there's an incredible amount of people that do the design on these books.
I imagine
that make them
many,
look
many
amazing.
people.
And over the years now, with technology the way it is, people learn how to be a graphic artist and then go into comic books. So they're bringing all this visual style from other mediums into play.
Now, I know you have a store in South Orange, Commuter Comics, and tell me, is investing in comics a good thing to do today as far as an investment? I imagine.
I think,
some of the prices are, I know you showed me one that was $600 or $700.
Yeah, actually.
Let's take a look at that.
This is, where is it? This is a copy of X-Men #1. And now this is not in very good shape. Comics generally run from poor to near mint. Near mint is an absolutely perfect. Here, excuse me for just one moment.
I'll tell you. All right.
Comics run from poor to near mint.
Right.
And this book is basically in good. Poor is without a cover,
Right.
big chunks taken out of it. This one has a lot of water damage on it, but this X-Men in near mint is worth about $15,000.
$15,000.
Yes, this particular one's worth about $600.
Wow.
in the shape that it's in. Now, a book like, again, Action Comics #1, this reprint, even though it's from 1988, is still worth $9. It would cost 50 cents at the time. But if you actually had the first printing of Action Comics #1 in near mint condition, which means there's no marks, there's no creases, there's no nicks, there's nothing missing.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of myth, but nothing mythic. That book, the Action Comics #1, would be worth, as I say, about $1 million. So you can, when collecting books, the better the condition, the faster it's going to go up in value.
I imagine.
So you want books that are in absolute near mint condition.
I know Nicolas Cage is a big comic book
Nicolas
collector.
Cage was a big collector. He's really into the anime. He's really into the comics. He gathered a lot of. He's going to be in Ghost Rider, and he has a big tattoo of Ghost Rider.
Oh, he does.
And that they actually had to CG.
And that's a true comic book collector.
They had to take
How many
it out of the
tattoos do you
movie.
have, Jeff?
I don't have any tattoos and no piercings either. Which is not my style. But he had amassed a big collection.
He sold his collection recently for $1.6 million, I believe.
Yep. He had a lot of actions, a lot of Supermans, that kind of thing. Things that he purchased when he was, I think, being considered to be in the Superman movie years ago that Tim Burton was going to do.
I imagine comics are great research reflecting the culture of our society. If you just go through comics, it's a wonderful time capsule.
The best of them are. I mean, as I say, they started as political cartoons. I mean, they started as a method of communication, but really the form came out of satire and political satire and commentary. And the best of them still do that. Marvel's doing a thing now called Civil War, which is reflecting what's going on. They're mirroring with the superheroes what's going on with in our own society in terms of the gulags, making people register, hunting people down, calling any superhero who doesn't register a terrorist, and dealing with them much in the same manner that our government is. And so it's a very popular book because it's reflecting what's going on. Oh yeah, even now.
In 20 or 30 years, you could do.
Well, even now the prices on that are starting to go up. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about retire, but your whole collection, yes. You eventually down the road, if you hold on to them and keep them in good shape, you can sell them for a tidy profit.
We've got about 30 seconds to go, so
read comics. They're a lot of fun.
Read comics. It's a lot of fun. It's great having you on the show.
Thanks.
And Commuter Comics South Orange, for a Nostalgia Alley audience, would it be free appraisals?
Free appraisals.
Free appraisals for our audience.
If they
can bring in
mention,
Superman #1.
If they mention
my name.
Nostalgia Alley.
Okay.
And your name.
All right.
They have to say your name.
All right. Good. That sounds good. This is Mike Sobel saying it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I'd like to say good night to you, and especially to you.
Knowledge is not we should be taught to dance. Right here at Tate, we're up to date. We teach a great new dance. Don't think that I brag.